Three kids walk into school. Same building, same age, same hallways. But one of them gets hit with a ruler for talking back. One of them sneaks out early to go to a concert. And one of them never looks up from a phone screen the entire day. These are not three different schools. These are the same school decades apart. And by the end of this video, you are going to know exactly which one was yours, what it did to your brain, and why your kids today are growing up in a completely different psychological world than you did. Stay with me, because the last part of this video is going to explain something about yourself that you have never been able to put into words. Let's go back to 1950. If you walked into a classroom in 1950, you would see something that looks almost unrecognizable today. Rows of desks bolted to the floor, children sitting in complete silence unless called on, a teacher standing at the front who was treated with the same authority as a military officer. You did not question the teacher, you did not talk back. If you misbehaved, the punishment was immediate and physical, and nobody called Child Protective Services. Your parents would have agreed with the teacher before you even finished explaining what happened. This was the era of obedience. And here is what almost nobody talks about: that obedience was not random. It was designed on purpose. After World War II, the entire Western world was rebuilding industrial economies. Factories needed workers who showed up on time, followed instructions without arguing, and did not ask why. Schools in the 1950s were essentially factories for compliant adults, and it worked exactly as intended. That generation built the most productive industrial economy in human history, but there was a cost. Psychologists who studied that generation later found significantly higher rates of suppressed emotional expression. Kids who grew up never being allowed to question authority often struggled later in life to advocate for themselves, set boundaries, or challenge unfair situations. The system got obedient workers, but it also got adults who sometimes could not say no, even when they desperately needed to. Now let's jump to the 1980s. If you grew up in this era, school looked completely different. Teachers were still in charge, but something had shifted. Music had exploded. Television was in every home. Kids were starting to develop identities outside of school for the first time in modern history. This was the era of freedom. You skipped class sometimes, you talked back occasionally and survived it. You had a Walkman in your backpack and music that your parents hated. You formed friend groups based on what you were into, not just who lived on your street. This generation got something the 1950s generation never had: the ability to develop an individual identity separate from authority. But it came with its own problem, because the structure loosened just enough that a lot of kids felt melody cracks. Less oversight, less consistency, a generation that learned independence, but sometimes at the cost of guidance they actually needed. Researchers who study this generation found something interesting: higher rates of self-reliance and creativity, but also higher rates of kids figuring out major life decisions completely alone, without any adult really paying close attention. Freedom without structure has a cost too. Hey, if you are starting to recognize your own childhood in one of these eras, hit that like button right now and subscribe to System Broken, because we are about to get to the era that might be hitting closest to home for a lot of you. Let's keep going. Now let's talk about 2010 to 2020. If your kids are in school right now, or if you went to school during this window, you already know this looks nothing like the previous two eras. A phone in every pocket, constant connection, constant comparison, constant notifications. This is not the era of obedience. It is not the era of freedom. This is the era of overstimulation. A 2019 study published in JAMA Psychiatry found that teen depression rates increased by over 50% between 2009 and 2019, the exact window when smartphones became universal among teenagers. Researcher Jean Twenge, who has spent decades studying generational differences, found that teens in this era spend significantly less time with friends in person than any previous generation, despite being more, quote, connected than any generation in history. Think about how strange that is. The most connected generation in human history is also the loneliest. These kids are not being punished into silence like the 1950s. They are not being given freedom to roam like the 1980s. They are being handed a device that delivers a constant stream of comparison, validation seeking, and information overload before their brains have even finished developing the ability to regulate emotion. Neuroscientists call this the still developing prefrontal cortex problem. The part of the brain responsible for impulse control and emotional regulation does not finish developing until the mid-20s. And we have handed an infinite scroll of dopamine triggers to children whose brains are not built to handle it yet. So which era actually produced the healthiest kids? Here is the honest answer. None of them did it perfectly. The 1950s produced disciplined adults who often could not express emotion or stand up for themselves. The 1980s produced independent adults who sometimes lacked guidance and structure. And the current era is producing connected adults who are more anxious, more isolated, and more overstimulated than any generation before them. Each era solved the problems of the previous one and created brand new problems nobody saw coming. So what does this actually mean for you? If you grew up in the obedience era, you might still struggle with setting boundaries or expressing what you actually want. That is not a personal failure. That is a system that trained you that way. If you grew up in the freedom era, you might have learned to be independent, but you might also recognize gaps in guidance you wish someone had given you. And if you are raising kids in the overstimulation era right now, the most powerful thing you can do is not eliminate technology entirely, but create boundaries. The technology itself was never designed to create phone-free meals, phone-free bedrooms, real conversations that do not compete with a screen. Because every generation thinks the next one has it easier, and every generation is wrong. So here's my question for you. Drop it in the comments right now. Which era was yours? The obedience, the freedom, or the overstimulation? And looking back, what do you wish someone had told you when you were that age? I read every single comment, every one. And if this video helped you understand your own childhood a little differently today, subscribe to System Broken, because every single week we break down the truth about education, generations, and the systems that shaped who we all became. I will see you in the next one.